Hey everyone, this is Dr. Russ Jones.
And Brad Kennan here.
We are wide open.
Another day, another dollar, Russ.
Yes, how are you today, my friend?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I was out today. It's hunting season. I was not hunting. I was in a safe zone. Shade and I came around this curve in this trail, maybe a mile back in the woods, and there was a couple of hunters that were walking out, and we kind of just didn't see each other until we were about 10 feet apart because of a curve in the mountain. And the one guy literally fell down. He thought Shade was a bear cub running at him because it just happened so quick.
Thank God he didn't shoot your dog.
Yeah, I said, you seen anything? And he said, too many people with dogs. So I guess
Nice.
He was too close to the main part of the park.
Nice. Or is that a jab at you?
Probably,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy. I don't know. You're a pretty big guy. It'd be tough to, unless you're carrying guns. I don't know if I would take any more, jabs at you by, anyway. Anyway, it's been a long day.
Okay.
So since it is hunting season, I thought about this for a little while, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to ask Russ.
Okay.
Since you're hunting and you've got these nice deer stands on your farm, and you got this food plot, and let's say this nice couple does walk out, and the next thing you know, the doe looks around, and a Bigfoot jumps out and tackles this doe right in front of you.
Wow.
Do you take a shot? Do you kill this animal? Okay, so let's not say you personally. So in general, do you think a hunter would take that shot? A, do you think a hunter has taken that shot? B, C, if it was called into the police and the police came out and looked at it and they looked at this thing, because there's a lot of descriptions of this thing being so human-like, do you think that they would be brought up on charges?
Do you have something to write down A, B, and C so I can keep track of those as we go through these?
I do not.
All right. So
these are off the top of my head.
All right. I would not shoot a Bigfoot personally, but I have interviewed 4 witnesses that had clear shots during deer season that did not shoot. But, I think that clearly there's a chance that it's going to happen probably sometime. I think that historically there has been a record of Bigfoot being killed every 3 years. Of course, who knows how many of these are true. But I remember there was a story, my farm's close to Ohio University. 2 Ohio University students were in, I don't remember, it was Montana maybe, or I think it was Montana, were elk hunting. Apparently they thought it was an elk. They shot it. It was apparently a Bigfoot that was down on all fours doing something. And they said it looked too human-like. They buried it and swore each other that they would never talk about it. And then about 10 years ago, one of the guys died. The other guy flew back out there, went to the local police, and they contacted the game warden. They took the guy out to where he was. But you can imagine it was like 30 years prior to this. None of the woods. I can barely find my game cameras when I go back out, and I kind of know where they are. And, it's hard to find them when the leaves change and, timber happens and different things. And so I do not believe that anybody is going to get charged for it. But can you imagine being that person that everybody goes nuts about, because you shot a Bigfoot?
Right. You would be chastised on, people make a wrong statement on Twitter and they're literally doxxed, and, their families run out of jobs and fired. And let's say you're the guy that pulls the trigger on a Bigfoot, and, I can't even imagine the protests that would occur at that point in time. So,
yeah, let me tell you this story. I had one of my patients. It's not a Bigfoot story, but it's a snake story. And one of my patients is a pilot, and it was hot when he was starting up his plane, so he left the door open. And he said that, he's flying and he's up around the Ohio River, which is probably, 30 minutes away or something. And he always holds his radio in his hand. And he said that he just happened to look down, and right below the instrument panel was a head of a snake sticking out. And so he whacked it, fell on his legs. He picked it up, trying to throw it out the little window to the side. It wrapped all around his arm. He could not get it in. So he was radioing, I believe, somewhere over around Gallipolis, requesting emergency landing. They said, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he says, I've got one arm full of airplane, another arm full of snake, and I need to land. And he landed. He walked over in this field or whatever and released. It was a black snake. But that airport, I guess they had all kinds of problems because people were reading that and they didn't finish reading the whole story. And all these people were calling, wanting to know what happened to the snake.
And yet people every day, kill snakes, run over snakes. They find snakes in their barn, which a rat snake you shouldn't kill anyway, but or a black snake. So, but there's a lot of people out there that just don't know and they kill something, and it is what it is. I hit them with the mower all the time. I don't like to, but you hit them with the mower because they're whatever. They just don't get out of the way.
Yeah.
So I tell you who, we could probably ask our next guest because he's been all around the country, I do believe. And I think he's out of Texas. And there was a story that I heard one time about a guy in Texas that did the same thing. He was actually made his living hunting animals for all that kind of stuff. And he thought it was a bear, shot it. Ended up being a Bigfoot. It went back into a bunch of brambles or something, some thorns. He went in after it. The juvenile Bigfoot started making a lot of noise. He had to kill it, buried them both, made a map, gave it to his lawyer, says, when I die, you can release it. And I never, ever know what happened to that story. So
you're talking about the bug story.
Is that it?
I'm sure that Lyle probably knows a lot more about that than me.
Well, we didn't even introduce our guest yet,
well.
but our guest is Lyle Blackburn. Hey, Lyle, how you doing?
Good. How are y'all?
Hey, Lyle. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for coming on.
You betcha.
So you said y'all. Where are you from, actually? Right.
I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and I've lived in the Fort Worth, Dallas area my whole life.
Okay. All right. I got a sister in Austin, so I've flown in Dallas a couple times to go visit her when I couldn't get a flight directly to Austin. So
right on.
Anyway, I love Texas.
Have you heard of the story, that bug story?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do cover that in my new Texas Bigfoot book. In fact, there's a section on that because.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's one of those, sort of famous Lone Star Bigfoot stories, because this guy calling himself Bugs had called into Coast to Coast back when Art Bell was the host and told that story in various iterations where, like you described, they were actually in an unlikely habitat for Bigfoot. They were up in the panhandle of Texas. And if wow. I'm sure people know that jut that goes off up north at the top of the state. Out there, it's very open, hardly any woods. Yet he was along a creek there, and they encountered a big, hairy, upright creature, ended up shooting it, and then it ran into an area of brambles where he crawled in. Therein, he encountered what he said was a female. So he shot that specimen, and they were both, killed these Bigfoots. They, as all these people tend to do, they buried it, and and then didn't want to say where exactly it was, but he was calling a radio show, and then et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there's more to the story that goes on. I won't go the whole way, but again, it's just one of those where it's a sort of a dubious story because somebody shot one and then they don't have anything to show for it. No photo, no right. Finger, no hair, no nothing. And then the story kind of goes on and on. But when he called in, I believe Robert Morgan was on one of the shows, and the guy was supposedly going to give him a map and divulge the exact location, and it's sort of this guy ended up not being a very reputable person, but really there's no way to prove that they didn't shoot one, or if they did.
Well, the first thing that jumps in my mind is everybody says these things weigh, between 500 and 600-700 pounds, maybe they're in a part of Texas where maybe they're a little skinnier because it's a little warmer down there. And, Russ has that calculation. I don't know who's the guy, the equator guy, that the size.
Bergman's rule.
Bergman's rule. There you go. I always got to ask the human encyclopedia over there. this thing's big and heavy, and if you bury it, or if you gotta dig a hole, number one, and then you got to get it into the hole. How's he going to get in the hole if it's that big?
And we're talking two of them. And I mean, I literally have been up there in that panhandle. I was just there back in early summer and thinking about that story. And I was taking some pictures for my book. And I mean, the soil is not soil you want to dig in. So you're right. It would be a massive undertaking to be able to sufficiently bury these to where, if you think you're going to go back later, because if you didn't bury it, coyotes and turkey vultures and everything else is just going to eat that thing up.
Right. Okay.
Have you ever had any other witnesses that claimed that they had shot one?
There are other stories, even in Texas, where people claim to have shot at them. I haven't interviewed anyone that said they had directly shot at one and whatever the result was. I haven't come across a witness personally.
So when we any time during this entire podcast, when we say at one or something of that sort, we're referencing any of the cryptids that you've investigated. So everything from the lizard guys to the Bigfoots. And we're going to get into the pig people here in a minute, because I listened to another podcast and you brought up these pig people out of Arkansas, Alabama, something like that, or Georgia. I don't know what that is. So I'm
not sure I want Pigman to exist. I mean, that's kind of like Dogman.
Honestly,
I don't want those.
No, I'm going to get into this right now because
you're trying to keep me from going in the woods.
No,
by naming these things.
Well,
Dogman, Pigman. It's like,
yeah,
Dogman. He's off the table.
I don't want anything with a snout that's like a little. I don't know. It's a little freaky. If something has a snout in the woods, I'm out of there.
So in 2016, the BBC reported that had actually developed a human pig chimera in a lab, which embryos that could grow to be true humans, or not, whatever these things are, alive. But they said, no, we don't let them go to that point. We destroy them. So my question is this, because you have had a couple stories of these pig human things. People have seen them, I guess.
Wait a second. What is the name? What is the name for these things?
Well, the first and some of the more prominent legends, if you will, come out of Georgia. In southern Georgia, there's tales of Pigman, and they're a little vague. I mean, sometimes I'm not sure if this is sort of like a localized name for Bigfoot, like they would say skunk ape or Pigman, or they're literally talking about an anthropomorphic pig thing. So the Georgia legends are a little vague and interesting, and I mentioned that in a few of the books. But I did get a report from Arkansas of somebody saying they had seen a pig man run across a road, and my first question was
after a football game of some sort,
right? A Razorback. I mean, my first question was, was it a pig with a human face or a human with a pig face? Let me grasp the visual.
Could it wear jeans?
Right. So, I mean, when you investigate these things, especially when I get off and do things outside of Bigfoot, you get these wacky reports. But I mean, they're as solid as any credible Bigfoot witness, where he's like, I don't know, man. I was driving. I saw this thing run across the road. It was running upright. It looked like it had a pig-like head with a snout and the skin coloration, but it was running on two legs, and it was brief, and it was in a wooded area after dark. So obviously it's not posing for a glamour photo, but I don't know, the guy was quite convinced that's what it was. And he just had no explanation, and it was kind of scared by the whole thing, and almost kind of gives you this, like, I don't know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of vibe, or was it, you know, some hillbilly with a pig head, or, I mean, just what the heck, you know?
Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't be afraid?
I instead of how many books do you have out, Lyle? I think 8, something of that sort.
8.
So you have 8 books. Number
Which
9,
is remarkable.
Number 9. So we're going to add this to your list of things to do.
Okay, he needs that.
A script. You're going to write a script about Pigman in Texas. And it's going to be on the auspices of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre type deal, and I think it would be a great hit. So
wow,
I agree that there's a lot of there is potential there with you know, a Pigman horror type story, movie, book. So yeah, good idea.
Awesome. So, you know, you have this whole musician vibe. I assume you are a musician.
Correct.
How long have you been a musician? You don't have to age yourself, so just, you know, you can use round numbers.
Yeah, well, I joined my first band in 7th grade, and before the end of high school, I had a punk band that was on a compilation of punk bands on vinyl, on a vinyl record out of California. So before I was ever out of high school, I had something, you know, or I had accomplished that. And then there in my 20s, started playing in kind of a metal band. We were signed on Roadrunner Records, and that's a big label. And we toured US and Canada and Europe and all over. And I did that, and I was good at writing. In the middle of that, I would go to take college courses, and I had a degree in English for no real reason other than it was easy because I can write. And I worked for rock magazines and horror magazines and other stuff between, you know, you got to do something between tours. So writing kind of was the thing that I did besides being a musician. And it's really pretty much continued that to this very day.
That's good. Now, did that give you an opportunity? Have you ever been out on the road and you said, hey, you know, there's a patch of woods down the street I'd really like to go investigate? I think Todd Prescott brought that up on one of his podcasts. It's, you know, he was a musician and he would go out and play at night, maybe go out into the woods after that, come back in the morning, sleep some, do the whole thing again. You know, being across the country in a lot of places, especially I think you said Canada or Europe or whatever. Did that give you that opportunity to maybe get out and do a little bit of that exploration?
Somewhat. You know, early on, I would often read Bigfoot books and stuff in the tour bus, and people would be like, "What are you reading?" You know, all the time. But typically, what I was doing, you couldn't. I mean, we had a tour bus driver, and you had to get on the bus, and you traveled to the next. And we were just I've seen every downtown section of every major city. So you would pass by a lot of places where you're looking out going, oh man, that's cool. You know, we're driving through Poland or whatever. And it's like, surely werewolves live in this place or trolls or whatever. But yeah, it was like, if you miss the bus,
you couldn't miss the bus. You're not catching it up again.
Our singer once did that in Germany at a big festival. The bus driver, who was Austrian, said we were leaving in 15 minutes, and we were desperately trying to find our singer, who had wandered off into a field where there was thousands of people and tents, and we did not find him. So our bus driver left him in Germany, and we went. I don't remember. I guess we were still in Germany, but he had to find his way back on a bus and all this other stuff. Miraculously, I would have been forget it. I would have just gone off in the woods and done research and then call me again.
So what instrument do you play, and do you sing as well?
I do now. The band I've had for quite some time is called Ghoultown, and in Ghoultown, I'm the frontman, singer, and play guitar. But back in the other bands, I mean, I played various other instruments, bass, and started on drums back when I was first playing in high school. So I kind of have done it all, but somehow I kind of became the songwriter, and then just somehow ended up as the front man, even though I really never aspired to be a singer. It just it was by default, really.
I didn't know that about you. That's pretty interesting. Is it a metal band still?
No, Ghoultown is more, how do I describe, more like a mix between Johnny Cash and Rob Zombie. At some point I've always wanted to do something that was more unique. You know, I mean, you're just sort of I'm another long-haired guy, or I'm another, punk rocker, or I was into the Misfits. So it was like horror punk. And eventually I kind of embraced the Texas roots and the kind of the horror and the spooky vibe. And with Ghoultown, it gave me the opportunity to incorporate stuff that I loved when I was a kid, like Johnny Cash and Ghost Riders in the Sky kind of vibe, with punk and metal and spaghetti western overtones. So Ghoultown is sort of a very unique band that doesn't really fit into any genre, but we have our own following and all that. So people can just search Ghoultown on YouTube and watch videos and all that kind of stuff, or listen on Spotify or any other streaming service. And that's the best way really to describe it, is just listening to the various songs.
Huh. That is funny. That is funny that you mentioned that. That looks like you. Can you see that?
No,
I can't see it.
No, you can't. Okay. Let me see.
I do.
That is me.
That is you. You have quite the following, don't you? You got. I mean, this is real time.
But werewolves, maybe so.
All right, pretty cool.
Yeah, that video I hadn't gotten up to some of the others, but some of them have like 25 million views, and
that's unbelievable.
Hey, the first one I pulled up had 21 million views, and I was like, hey, yeah, that's to be honest with you.
So yeah, there's it's built the following over the years.
Well, let me ask you this question. I know that one of the things I was curious about is I was thinking about how long you've been involved. And I know that you're an author and, obviously you're a very successful musician, but in order for people to stick with Bigfoot type thing, I mean, you have to almost, like I had an encounter when I was young, and that's what really drove me into it, made me stick with it. What is it that's like made you so passionate about it? Because you've been in it a lot of years.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a certain combination of my interest and what I was exposed to early on, because it's as far back as I have memories, I loved movie monsters. As soon as I was exposed to like the old TV show Dark Shadows and stuff like that, I was like, oh, vampires and werewolves. And then at some point when I was around third grade, maybe, I got a book, Strange But True book, that had stories of Yeti and Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of any of that. And now I'm thinking, wow, this is cool. This is like big, hairy creatures that like maybe in real life, And in combination with that, I had grown up hunting with my father. My father is an avid bow hunter and still is. He's 80. And so, I was always in the woods, and we passed through these small towns and stuff. And then I saw the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. And that really like, whoa, this is the greatest, because it was a Bigfoot tale. It was in the South, it was in a town like I had passed through many times. And, I had a Bigfoot that was presumably living closer to Texas than something in the Pacific Northwest. So I just became enthralled with with Bigfoot and specifically The Legend of Boggy Creek, to where, I just kind of always read books or kind of followed that. And then later on, when I was writing for the horror magazine Rue Morgue, I really wanted to do a book. And that's when I was like, what is my favorite thing ever? And that's the best way you're going to write a good book. And I thought The Legend of Boggy Creek, nobody's written a book on that yet. It's really famous. It's a big movie. Every Bigfooter I talk to, oh yeah, I love the Legend of Boggy Creek. I'm like, well, this needs a book. So that little flame that was going from that, now I'm an adult. Now I'm going to look at it seriously. And then that's when I started. And then when the Beast of Boggy Creek book came out, and I realized that people really were interested in this and it was well received, and I was going to Bigfoot conferences in Texas and now like Ohio Bigfoot conference, and people are like, oh man, this is great. Then it just sort of fueled the fire of that. So, again, it's just something that was always there. And I love the stories and to do the research and stuff, as well as go in the woods, So, I do both because I love the outdoors, and it just combines all my passions into one thing, and is a good alternative to all those cities, downtowns that I played in over the years. I like to be in the woods, that's what I do when I have any spare time. So this way I combined all of it into one.
Now, was the Legend of Boggy Creek, that book, was that your first book?
The Beast of Boggy Creek.
The Beast of Boggy Creek. So did you actually go to Falk, Arkansas and spend some time with those people and, do your research and history of that there? It wasn't just something you kind of Googled on the internet and read a bunch of articles. You actually went and spent time, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I went there numerous times because especially back when I started working on that I was working on that in about 2009. You could Google some stuff. Of course, I collected the newspaper articles, but I also went up there to the Texarkana Gazette and got more. But you couldn't really Google very much as far as the sightings, because a lot of those sightings that are in my book and really in subsequent books like the Boggy Creek case book, they were not on record anywhere. So those are ones that the witnesses may or may not have been available to interview or whatever, but to gather these stories and track them down. So,
right.
I've been to Falk hundreds of times.
So it was a boots on the ground, passion project that you really dove into. That's really good.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So I think you did did you do what at the Ohio Bigfoot conference? You did a talked about that quite a bit, I do believe, right?
Yeah. Especially early on when I was doing the Bigfoot conferences, I would just do the Boggy Creek case, as a presentation. Sure. and would do that. But as the years gone on, there would be sort of a lot of the same people there. So I thought, well, I can't just keep doing the same presentation. So of course I would do other things, or the more I went, I focused on Boggy Creek, and then I wrote a Lizard Man book where I went to South Carolina, and then other books. So I'm always was learning more or coming across more cases, or could throw in some stories about how I heard some weird stuff or saw weird stuff or whatever, to where it just kept compounding from there.
Okay. So Lizard Man. The only Lizard Man I've ever heard of is the one on conspiracy theorists. And they talk about all these lizard people that, came here from outer space, and, they dominate politics and things like that. Probably not the same Lizard Man you're talking about if it's in South Carolina. My wife is in South Carolina right now visiting her relatives, and probably she knew this. She would probably lock her doors a little extra every night. So what is the Lizard Man? Where is he at in South Carolina? And do people really have, true sightings of this thing?
Well, yeah, there's a difference. Like what you're talking about, I call reptilians, and it's sort of a different subject. The Lizard Man case that I was looking into is known as the Bishopville Lizard Man, or the Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp. And this was a case that was heavily covered in the media back in the summer of 1988 in the small town of Bishopville in Lee County, South Carolina. And in the newspaper, they talked about sightings and such. And one of the most sensational of those was a young man named Christopher Davis, who had been driving around 2 a.m. from his fast food job in Bishopville home, and he had to go through this area called Skateboard Swamp, where he unfortunately had a flat tire. And as he was finishing up changing that, something came running at him in the moonlight from the swamp, and he claimed it was this upright brownish or greenish skin tone thing with 3 fingers and long fingernails, and it basically tried to attack him. He jumped in his car and drove away. The case was investigated by the sheriff's department out there, and within this, other people started coming forward when this made the newspaper saying, I saw something like that. I just didn't, I didn't want to say anything as people think I'm crazy, but I guess if this kid says he saw it, I'm telling you, I saw this 2 years ago, 2 months ago, and it kind of went on like that. And there was crazy news coverage. I mean, People Magazine, Dan Rather, CBS News, all this stuff, just a bizarre thing. And so it's just something I read about in cryptozoology books over the years. And I was like, man, sounds crazy. It's like Creature from the Black Lagoon in modern times. So I went on this swamp tour, as I called it, after I did the Beast of Boggy Creek, and I ended up in Bishopville and just doing research and stuff. And I didn't really necessarily intend to write a book, but as soon as I got back from that, there was a newspaper article. Writer comes to town. He's writing a book on the Lizard Man. So
oh gosh, no choice now.
I thought, well, heck, I guess that's what I'm doing. So I just let fate be the guide there, and so and as well, I kind of established that I like all these wild and creepy cryptid stories. So I thought my second book, not just another Bigfoot. It's now I'm doing something that's different. I just tell the story, interview whom I can, gather the newspaper articles, put it together all within this framework of now. A lot of the times I'm inserting myself, I can say, I went there. Here's what I saw. Here's the story. And so that's how that one came about.
Did you feel like it was believable?
Well, again, I think that there some people, and even some I interviewed, definitely saw something they couldn't explain. But of course, when you're talking about the probability of reptilian humanoids or pigmen or whatever, it starts getting harder to explain than Bigfoot.
There's no branch on the evolutionary tree that says alligator, lizard, 2 feet, bipedal.
Right. Yeah. There is no known branch like that, though. There's conjecture that if some theropod type dinosaurs had continued to evolve and got smarter, their brains got bigger, they would possibly end up standing up and all that kind of stuff. But obviously there's no examples of that. So yeah, if they start spitballing that, well, maybe it's a Bigfoot with mange, it's covered in algae. It was, there was several people that claimed that it was a hoax and they were responsible for it, but they could never quite explain, if they were wearing a rubber mask, first, how they could fool people who saw it fairly close, and 2, they'd have been down there for 5 or 7 years waiting in the swamp for somebody to, it just seemed ludicrous. Yeah. But I don't claim to have the full answer, and I can say that seems unlikely, but again, it's a very strange and bizarre story that even unto itself, the story is kind of fascinating.
I can tell you definitively that it is not as scary if you would have put as like maybe a snout on the reptilian man. A snout, something about it would have made it much more scary to me. He had the long fingers that came out of the swamp. It was slimy and it had a pig snout. That would have been like,
well, you probably then would not like the sighting report I got not long ago when I was working on my second episode of my podcast in Central Texas, where I was trying to find witnesses for this one certain really weird thing, but somebody else had phoned me up and said, well, I didn't see that in that town, but had claimed that he was on the Brazos River one evening and they were fishing, and he and a buddy, and all of a sudden it's getting dusky and starting to get dark. They hear this splashing, plodding through the water, and they're like, somebody's, walking. And they said when this thing approached, they said it was standing upright, and it was like, he said, basically scaly like an alligator, but walking on two legs, but had that, it had a snout. It was some kind of more animal-like lizard alligator thing walking upright. And he said they just turned and ran and got in the truck and just left their fishing gear and got the hell out.
Yeah.
So there's all those various versions of lizard men, like the government kind, the skateboard swamp one that's a little more anthropomorphic, and then you've got these like alligator things that have the ability to walk on two legs.
Well, I'm just going to throw this out there if my wife's listening, which she's at some point she will. Honey, you're 15 miles from Bishopville and the Bishopville Lizard Man. So I'm going to get you the book
that's
for
nothing.
Christmas. They're fast.
Yeah.
So
you've seen lizards
it's basically
run.
down the street. It's basically down the street from where she's staying.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Hey, how many years or how many weekends a year are you on the road doing between Ghoultown and your, going to the different conferences?
Almost every other weekend, at times. There'll be some slower months, like, I don't know, January or February or something where there's not conferences. But even on those months, I tend to go out and do some camping, or, especially down here, it can be warm, you never know the weather, but yeah, it is a lot.
That is a lot.
So your most recent book, when's it come out? Did it come out? What's it about? Give us the skinny on that.
The new book is called Texas Bigfoot, and it came out in September.
Okay.
And it's sort of a culmination of, I tried to cover all the major points and a good section of sightings from Texas, because Texas isn't really known for Bigfoot, but believe it or not, it's rates way up there as far as numbers of sightings. And there's been some really wild history. And we started out talking about the Bugs Bigfoot murder right there. And of course, being a Texan, I thought, well, again, nobody had really written the definitive book on that. And so over the years, I've thought, that's something that needs to be done. And, finally just found the time to sit down and knock it out. But I'd collected newspaper articles as far as the old stuff. And then, I'd interviewed various people. And as well, my buddy Craig Woolheater, who originally started the Texas Bigfoot Research Center down here in Texas long ago, they had a lot of files and sightings and stuff. So he gave me access to all that, which gave me a way to kind of cover all the zones of Texas, because Texas is huge, so I wanted to cover all the high points and what I believed were some of the most credible sightings or the most dynamic, and all that sort of stuff of all the different regions of Texas where in the east, where you have a proliferation of sightings because it's the piney woods, and even over to the west, even in El Paso, where it's like a desert, there's been some crazy sightings. So that's the book, and it just sort of encompasses, not just my own. It's not just my own research. It's just literally what I believe to be some of the most dynamic examples of Bigfoot encounters in Texas.
Awesome.
I know we touched on it before. You know, you have a podcast that you started not long ago, and I know I've listened several of the episodes. I really enjoy how you do it because you're not really necessarily interviewing people. It's more of a narrative type thing, and you always have such a great voice for doing that anyways. But it's called Monstro Bizarro. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about the podcast?
Yeah, the name came from my longtime column in Rue Morgue Horror Magazine, where I wrote about sort of the juxtaposition of cryptids meets culture and movies, because I was kind of knowledgeable on both fronts. And people have asked me for years, man, you need to do a podcast, and I just literally did not have the time to do it. And so I don't know, just finally I thought, I've narrated 7 or 8 small town monsters, cryptid movies, documentaries, and people like the voice, and I thought, well, maybe I could do something like that where something different. There's a lot of interview podcasts, and there's so many great podcasts already. I wanted to do something unique, so I felt like just kind of a narrative approach, kind of like with my books. I mean, the way I deliver that information or talk about the sightings and cases. So I thought, well, let's just give this a try. So I began working on it quite a long time before I had a few to start releasing. So I've got 8 episodes now, and it's definitely been popular.
Do you write them out prior to doing them, or is it a mixture, or you just have how do you go about that?
Yeah, I write it out, and I kind of had to experiment how this worked. But I learned that if I just start kind of talking off the cuff, it created an editing nightmare. So it was more efficient to go ahead and script the whole thing out, which takes, if it's something I've already done, I can punch it up in 5 days. But if it's something I got, I did a Mothman one where, I haven't written a book on Mothman. I know much about the case. I know a lot about the case, but, it can take 2 weeks to produce an episode. So
Wow.
very time intensive, which is why I only put out one a month. But it won Best New Podcast in the Paranormality Magazine Awards recently. So
That's good.
Congratulations.
I was proud of that. I guess, well, I better stick with it. Sort of like the Bishopville thing. Well, there's the newspaper. It says I'm doing it. I better do it.
So Russ is a big nonfiction reader of Bigfoot. Every Bigfoot book that's ever been published, made, probably, I would assume. I've been to his house, and they're everywhere. Now, myself, I'm not that intellectual, so I like fiction much better than nonfiction. I remember at one point I read a book. It was about a Bigfoot that I think his family was killed or something, and it basically went on this killing spree and went through a town and killed a bunch of people, and it was very interesting. And it was
Bigfoot Wars. Yeah,
it was part Bigfoot Wars. There was another one. I'll have to find it, but I maybe it was Bigfoot Wars.
Yeah,
is that the one? I know there's
Eric
several
Brown
of them.
Several of those, and they're really good. I've read that too. It's like just they're good books.
Now my question was, being in the literary side of this, do you have any recommendations of anything you've read, that might interest me?
Like in those fiction books?
Yeah, the fiction side of Bigfoot.
Those Eric Brown books I always thought were cool. They're just fast paced and
very
easy to read. The De-Evolution book is a pretty good one, but I don't read a lot of fiction books at all.
Okay.
And a lot of the time it's like more, obviously just sort of like dictated by what I'm looking at. I'll get up on a subject and usually read nonfiction. So it's kind of few and far between when I read these fictions, but I see a lot of them. And I know some of my cohorts like Adam Davis and Russ Accord have also written fiction books along with their, with actual Bigfoot research.
Some of them you start to read them and you're about 2 chapters in and you take it and you pitch it, because it's just not good. So
it's hard now with so many self-published books out there that, some are good and some are not good.
Right.
It's a challenge.
It is. You kind of, luckily there's reviews and stuff, but those don't always. And as a writer, unfortunately you kind of become jaded because you're like, I have a certain level of expectation of stuff. So yeah, it's sometimes you start reading, you're like, somebody needs to go to writing school.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to school at? You said you got a degree in English?
Yeah, University of Texas in Arlington, which is a branch of University of Texas, but up here, Arlington is very close to the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Gotcha. Okay.
You mentioned your father earlier, and I was curious whether or not, how does your father feel about Bigfoot now in retrospect that you're so active in it?
He's very interested in the subject, and he became more interested when I did the Beast of Boggy Creek, and in some ways he was instrumental because he took me to the drive-in, and my mom, who is still horrified by that experience, she doesn't like horror movies, but he pays more attention. He watches the shows and he'll pass information on to me or ask me about, hey, do you know this about this, or do you know this guy? And but he's pretty skeptical because he has been literally in the woods now. He probably started hunting when he was, I don't know, 5, or at least by the time he was 10 years old. So that's 70 years in the woods, and he's never seen anything. And he's been in areas where there's been, a pretty good amount of Bigfoot reports. So of course, he's going to be skeptical and all that. But I always say if my dad or my uncle sees one, there will be no question. They will shoot it and, and they will bring it home because they're quite good hunters and they don't have any qualms if they to prove it. But some people talk that way. We'll see if you actually were in that position. Again, you may think otherwise.
Now it's ironic. That's the biggest objection that most of the hunters I hear will say, I've been in there the whole life, blah, blah, blah. And ironically, it's also the people that have seen them. That's what they say. I've been there my whole life. I surely know every bird and animal I can see if something's upright and walking. And it's curious how that is. There's such a rare animal that many people who have been woodsmen their whole life have never seen one. Of course, I understand recently Bobo told me that you had been in Folk, and is that how you pronounce the Arkansas town? Falk?
Falk,
yeah. That you had maybe had your own sighting down there.
Yes. I couldn't say 100% with 100% certainty, but I did see something that perhaps was one of these creatures or certainly unusual. And it's not in any of my books because it's fairly new. This was May 29th, 2021 in an area of Falk that I've been to numerous times. It's an area where we normally camp in an area called Mercer Bayou, this isn't a public campground or anything like that. But there is a public boat ramp there that a few people will use, but it's way off the map. So it's rare you ever even see anybody out there. And this is part of the Sulphur River Wildlife Management Area, which is, it's not private property. So we had gone up there, myself, Jerry Hestan, which is another Texas Bigfoot researcher, and my girlfriend, Ashley. And we were just going to Falk to hang out. We were also going to interview a woman who had sent me some pretty compelling howls that she had recorded around her house in a place south of Falk. So we had been at what's called the Monster Mart in Falk, which is a super cool convenience store that has a Bigfoot on top. And we have a museum there where you can see, Legend of Boggy Creek type memorabilia. And we decided to drop by this area down there, just take a look. We wanted to look at the bayou and see what the level was. And we were standing there. This was probably about 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. I'm looking over across this channel because the bayou there runs in a channel, and there's alligators in there. It's murky and deep and creepy. And there's 2 cypress trees that we were looking at, which you actually see in one of the Monster Quest episodes that was filmed there. And I'm looking at the trees because, we're just looking at the changes, and something about, I don't know, 75 yards away caught my eye, and I thought it looked like something moving. So I focused on the area thinking, was it the way the trees or leaves are moving, or did I just see something moving over there? And as I looked, I saw and I thought, I think that's just the light breeze moving the shadows. Right after that, maybe 10, 15 yards behind that, I see something moving sort of diagonally across the opening between some heavier areas of trees. And it was very reddish in color. Obviously stood out from the foliage. No mistake about it. This was not, this was not a tree. This was not anything else. Whatever it was moving. And I couldn't see a lot of it because it was obscured mostly. And it moved kind of diagonally for, 3 seconds and moved behind some other trees where I could no longer see it. And I was like, what did I just see? And I wouldn't say I couldn't see, this or anything. It just sort of moved across there. And, I'm trying to eliminate everything. It was far too large to be a fox. And I'm thinking, well, even a fox, it was up on a log or something. The log would have to be super high, and it would, I've seen foxes cross logs plenty of times. Don't think it was that. Wasn't a person, I don't think. There's no one over there. There's no roads. There's no 4-wheeler tracks. There's no 4-wheelers. There's nothing red that should be over there. There's no cars there. There's no way to get across the bayou unless you have a boat. Because, I'm telling you, there's alligators everywhere in there, and nobody walks across it. I was not certain that it was, say, the Fouke monster, but here's the thing. When we were at the Monster Mart just minutes earlier, I was talking to a local there who is known to people, and is just kind of what I believe an honest guy, who claimed he had seen what the creature, or what he said, looked to him like an orangutan. He said it was reddish orange, and it ran right across the road. No question about it. He said it was some kind of an ape, and it ran mostly upright, then used its front hands to jump over a ditch and run into the woods. So there I am, a few minutes later, literally see a reddish something over in those trees. So we later, I didn't have a boat at the time. We later went back. I tried to estimate where it was and do all that whole, thing to where we tried to rule out anything else. And again, there is no roads. It's just people. I've been down there for the last 13 years. I've never once seen a person over there. Not once, ever. Nobody hikes over there. It wasn't hunting season. So there you have it.
All right.
Unusual color. That red, you mentioned a fox is kind of that color. Orangutan's kind of a, I don't know how you describe it. Just a reddish brown or almost an orange or something like that.
Yeah, and it was pretty orangish red. It was definitely unusual. And of course I'm thinking, wow, I finally get to see one, and it's got to be the orange one. I'm like, but and the other guy who had told us about that describing it like an orangutan. That's not the first time. I've heard a couple of other people say that it was quite reddish in color. So, who knows? I mean, it could have literally been an orangutan, which would be weird as hell anyway. But
Right.
I don't know how to explain it other than it was an anomaly there in the woods. I've never seen anything equivalent to that ever.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. You've interviewed so many people. Do you have a favorite story or a Bigfoot story that really stuck out with you that you think back about maybe being one of your favorites?
I kind of always go back to one, a story from Falk, and the reason this just always lingers with me is not only that the witness had a very close sighting, but that it's what I consider probably one of the most credible witnesses I've ever interviewed. Both him and I've gotten to know his family over the years, and so the story was back in 1982. This young man who lived in the area of Falk, in the south part, in the woods around this area called Jonesville, which is along the Sulphur River. And this is part of the area where some of those initial sightings from the early Legend of Boggy Creek film happened. And this was in 82, so it's after the movie and everything. And this young man, Terry Sutton, was down there fishing on his family's pond. They have a lot of land out there, and they have this pond that sits back away from the house down there. And he was out there one evening quietly fishing, and it was in February. And as he was fishing, he heard kind of something crunching around in the leaves. He heard what he thought might be the neighbor's bull making sounds. But, it's kind of usual stuff. And he said it was starting to get towards dusk, and he thought, well, I'm going to kind of edge over here on this other part of the pond and see if I get lucky, and then I'm going to head back to the house. And as soon as he kind of went around this bend, he then heard what sounded like footsteps in the leaf litter. And he said he looked up, and over the embankment came this upright, hair-covered creature that stood, in his estimation, over 6 feet tall. And it was walking somewhat hunched over, very ape-like. And he said it didn't appear to see him because he's sitting on very quietly in that boat, and the thing was not looking. And he saw a profile view from about 60 feet away, walked right over that embankment, right by the pond, and then walked back over another embankment and, crunched off into the woods. And of course, Terry was just, everything is going off in his head. I mean, it's like he knows of the Legend of Boggy Creek and the Falk Monster. Every kid down there did, but you don't expect to see it. And he was within 60 feet. He said it wasn't a person. It wasn't a person in a costume. It wasn't a hunter. I mean, they live this land. There's nobody walking on it anyway. It's private property, and no one just strolls down in through there. But he said it was an upright, ape-looking thing. And of course, he waited there, and he could hear the footsteps, and then the footsteps stopped. So he just rode to the bank, got out. All of a sudden, he heard that thing take off running. And at that point, he took off running towards the house, where his dad came up shortly thereafter. And he said, "Dad, I think I've seen the Falk Monster." So, I interviewed him over the phone. I've interviewed him personally. I've gotten to know his family, his father. And I mean, these are the most utmost credible people. No reason to make this up. Just, and he's never really told the story prior to me in a public fashion. A few people knew about it, but I don't know, it just lingers. He saw it so close, and he's so credible that if I throw out everything else, that one right there tells me there's just something out there that we simply cannot explain.
Yeah, I always thought about how we have tens of thousands of Bigfoot reports. And if you throw out, maybe keep the best 100 or 200, which would include like, Bob Action Jackson, the park ranger from Yellowstone, and some of the other ones, which are, the UCLA medical director, and some of the ones that are really well-known people that have these sightings that, there's some of them that, they just reinforce what you believe. They're the ones that keep you going. And, you get 10 reports every couple of weeks, and most of them are things you've heard before. But then, a few times a year, you'll get something that you think, this is really something. Somebody's clearly. I told Brad earlier, when you come down to it, when you're a skeptic is talking to you and you're talking about one of your witnesses, and you're like, well, if you don't think it's a Bigfoot that people are seeing, there's only two options. Either the person lies or, they've misidentified it. And people aren't really comfortable when they meet someone and hear their story saying that, well, they're lying, so clearly they must have misidentified it. But it's interesting, the witnesses are, I think, in the end, what really keep all of us going, the stories and then the relationships that we develop over the years. I think the first time I met you was probably around 10 years ago. And, I've always admired you. And I didn't know a lot that we found out tonight. Brad was really interested in hearing more about the music thing. And that was really interesting, and some of your background. But I really appreciate you taking the time. I know how busy you are. And I know many times when we're doing the podcast or I'm a guest on one, I'm like, oh gosh, I got to do a podcast tonight. It sounds great a month out, but then when you get there to that night, you're like, oh, so, I really appreciate you taking the hour with us and spending the time.
Well, no problem. Then it helps. I know you personally, and that those go to the top of the list of the ones I enjoy doing. And this is a great conversation. You guys ask good stuff, and even though there's a lot of it, and it takes time. I enjoy this stuff. I love to talk about this, and especially with colleagues. So I'm always down for it.
Awesome.
Well, Brad, you gonna get us out of here tonight?
I guess. Does Lyle want to pimp?
Yeah, so we
website, whatever you got.
Right. It comes to the part where I do the infomercial.
Right. Go ahead. That's what you get. Spend an hour with us. You get to do a 30-second infomercial.
Right. Yeah. So, if people want to get my books, of course, they're available on Amazon.com in various formats, ebook, paperback, and even some hardbacks. And I have my own online store if you want autograph varieties and other stuff you can't get on Amazon, including my Monster Sauce hot sauce. And you can go to lyleblackburn.com, and it's got a link there to the shop. And then Ghoultown, there's links on my lyleblackburn.com website to the band as well. Or, of course, like I said, you can just search on your favorite streaming platform and search Ghoultown and check it out. And who knows, you might like it. In some ways, it's been fun because the band has been exposed to a lot of potential fans that probably wouldn't have known about it otherwise, from this. So it's been really cool. There's sort of that crossover, and I'll have people come up to me at a Bigfoot conference and go, you think they're going to say, oh, I love your books. They'll go, I love your band, so.
Well, I tell you what, you said it's a cross between Johnny Cash and Rob Zombie, which I love both of those. So
Right.
I'm going to pull that one up. I got an hour drive in the morning out to a job site. So I'll see if what happens at 6:00 in the morning on my way out, and maybe I'll listen to some Ghoultown to wake me up. So
There you go. Sounds good. All right.
all right. Thanks, Lyle.
Thanks, Lyle. Appreciate it.
All right. All right. Got any closing comments, questions?
Let me
whatever?
say one thing. He mentioned Robert Morgan earlier, which is, unless you're in the Bigfoot community, you probably haven't heard of Robert, but he was out of Ohio, and gosh, he's an older gentleman now. I don't know exactly how old, but I just read today that he has Alzheimer's now, and he doesn't have any memory of his Bigfoot past. And he did a lot of TV shows and a lot of interviews. So I just want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with that family. That's a hard disease to go through, and He's in the Bigfoot community too.
Absolutely.
And Lyle was great, man. I mean, I like I said, I knew him, but I just didn't know those things about him. He's probably one of the most interesting people in the Bigfoot community.
Oh, absolutely. To write 8 books. I mean, Jiminy Christmas. That's a
Oh
lot of
man,
writing.
to do 2 and then now working on a second edition of that first one. I mean, I just can't imagine, and he travels every other weekend or whatever. So it's
I know
that's a lot.
I've called and talked to you on several occasions, and you're always writing on your book or doing something with the book. So I can't even imagine 8 books. So
Me either, man.
So anyway, what is it? What are you? The Bigfoot
BigfootDoc.com.
BigfootDoc.com. You think I'd remember that by now? You got.
That's right.
I always get confused with your Instagram, your website, our email, all that kind of stuff. Link and subscribe, or like and subscribe on YouTube.
Rate us.
Untold Radio Network on any of the platforms. Questions can be emailed to wideopenresearch@gmail.com. I don't know if we checked that. Yeah, we checked that account. I checked.
We're trying to once a month have a witness that no one has heard that's a compelling witness. So if you have a story you'd like to tell, we'd love to hear it.
Yep, absolutely. Anything else? We got Untold Radio Network AM. We get yelled at if we don't say that. Anyway, I think we're out of here. You ready to go?
Yes, sir. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you having.
Yep, we're out.